G'day, my name's Nick Linden. I'm a Livestock Officer with Agriculture Victoria, and today we're going to do some quick calculations to work out what level of performance that you can expect from your cattle on a couple of different feedstuffs. And it's a really good calculation to work through. Once you've done a feed test and you actually know the energy and you know the protein and you know the fibre that you've got in an available supplement, what sort of growth rates can you expect from your steers? And it's just so critical because it's going to impact on how long you have to feed them to get them up to a certain target weight, not only how long or how quickly they're going to get to that specification. There's some really useful calculations that you can do to estimate the performance of your cattle on a given feed source. And it requires, you need to have an understanding of the total energy consumption, so how much energy your steer's actually consuming, but you also need to be aware of what their maintenance requirement is as well. So that's the energy that's going to be tied up or used by the animal before any of the energy actually gets put into growth and development. So the formula is to estimate your growth rates. You need to know your total energy consumption divided by the maintenance requirement for that class of stock, less 1. So I think the best way to do it is probably to work through a practical example. So let's look at a mob of 300 kilo steers, and we're going to feed them 2 different hays that we've done a feed test on. Given that we're going to be feeding the same group of steers, let's calculate their maintenance requirement first, because that'll stay the same between both of those scenarios. So our 300 kilo steers, to calculate their maintenance requirement, what you need to do is do 0.1, so 10%, times the live weight of those steers plus 5. So 0.1 times the live weight plus 5. So here we've got our 0.1 times our 300 kilos plus the 5, means that we've got a maintenance requirement for those little guys of 35 megajoules. So they need that before they can do anything else, because the maintenance requirements have to be fulfilled first before we've got any hope of those steers actually starting to grow and put weight on for us. So that's our input, that's what we require. Now let's look at the feeds that we've got on hand to feed that class of stock. And in this scenario, we've got 2 hays that we can look at. Let's look at the performance of both of them. One hay that we feed tested is 8.5 megajoules of metabolisable energy per kilo, and it's a 60% NDF. Now, NDF is neutral detergent fibre, and it's just an indication of the total amount of fibre that's in that feed source. Obviously, the lower quality feed, or the greater the roughage of a feed, the higher the NDF will be. So our second feed that we're going to run through the scenario has 10 megajoules of metabolisable energy per kilo. So it's a higher quality feed, it's got more energy in it, and it's actually a lower NDF. So it's 52% for NDF. The best way to get those figures is to do a feed test, so you actually know the values that you're talking about. You're not guessing them, you're not estimating them, you've had the product tested and you know exactly what it's got. In the useful tables section of the Feeding Livestock website, there's a really good table that looks at what's the role of NDF on feed intake across a range of different live weights. Because the higher the NDF, the lower the feed intake will be. If it's got lots of roughage in it, it moves through the animal's rooms, through the digestive system really slowly. That slow rate of passage limits how much of it they can actually consume. If it's a high quality feed, think of fresh pasture, really high quality feed, low NDF, it can move through the animals pretty quickly so they can eat a lot more of it. So NDF has an impact on feed intake. And if you look at the tables for our 300 kilo steers, we know that these little guys will be able to consume 8 kilos of that 60% NDF feed. Whereas our other guys here, that same steers, same live weight, but on a higher quality feed, a lower NDF feed, they can consume more. And these guys will be consuming 9.6 kilos of that hay. So this is where it starts to point to the double whammy of feed quality. Higher quality feed, they can eat more of it. So they're eating more, and every kilo that they eat actually has more energy in it. So this is why quality is so important, because it adds up twice. It's not only they can eat more of it, but it's also got more quality in it. Let's do the sums though, because we need to work out what their total energy consumption has been. So we've got a mob of steers here that are eating 8 kilos, or consuming 8 kilos of hay per head. 8 kilos at 8.5 megajoules. So 8 kilos by our 8.5 megs. I mean, these guys will be consuming 68 megajoules each per day, eating as much of that hay as they possibly can. Whereas our other guys, this one's easy, 9.6 kilos at 10 megajoules, a total intake of 96 megajoules per day. So you can see the difference is starting to come apparent. Looked like a relatively small difference in feed quality, 8.5 megajoules versus 10 megajoules, but the actual energy that's being consumed by the animals is in excess of that again. So we've got 68 megajoules that's being consumed by these guys, or by the steers on this feed, versus 96 megajoules daily intake on the animals that are consuming this feed. So we know that they've both got a requirement of 35 megajoules. Let's plug that into the equation so we can get to the point of actually estimating what their growth rates are going to be. So if we do 68 divided by our maintenance, which was 35, and we're going to do the same for the 96, that gets divided by the 35 as well. And then we just need to keep working through that calculation. So if we do our 68 divided by the 45 minus 1, I'll get rid of that bit there so you can see it, minus the 1, that gives us the anticipated growth rate for the steers on that feed. And for those guys, they'll be doing 133 grams per head per day, which is really not a lot more than maintenance. They're just ticking along. You couldn't really say that they're flying along. 133 grams per head per day. Our 96 divided by 35 minus the 1, that's what we take off at the end once we've done that initial calculation. These guys are calculated at doing 600 grams per head per day. So almost 3 times, more than 3 times the growth rate for these steers that are basically just doing maintenance. These guys are really probably where you need them to be, up doing 600, better than half a kilo a day. So that's the difference for what was a relatively small difference in feed quality between the two. Now obviously we've kept it simple in a sense that what we're talking about here is just one input, the energy component. When you're talking about weaners, when you're talking about lactating stock, it's really important that you make sure that you address the other needs of those animals, and protein is the one that really comes to mind for those classes of stock. So, you know, you can't just look at energy. That's what we've done for this particular example, but you also need to be really mindful of meeting the animal's protein requirements, because if you don't have enough protein in the diet, you can put all the energy in there in the world and they still won't grow to that potential. You know, you might do the energy budget and say these steers should be growing at 600, 700 grams per day. If their protein requirements aren't being met, they're likely to just be doing, you know, break even, maybe even losing weight. So you need to be able to address both of those requirements.
So in this video, we talked about that you need to know the energy requirements of the class of stock that you're looking at, and we use 300 kilo weaners. The Feeding Livestock website's got all these sort of tables that you can tap into, and there's a couple of different pathways to finding that. Let's stick with our beef example, and if we just scroll down to the beef book, the drought feeding book, just clicking on that will open up the link that lets you get to that book. Now on the left, you can either open up the whole book, but sometimes far easier, down the right-hand side, there's a list of chapters that you can go to, and they're pretty obviously named. So chapter 6, feeding cattle, is the one that we need to go into, so we can actually look up what these energy requirements are. So that's opened up the chapter. And now if we just scroll down, and it's actually the first table that we come to. Now the drought book's a really good resource for this particular example because it gives you the energy and protein requirements of many different classes of cattle. So you can see the first table we come to actually talks about steers and heifers. But if you keep scrolling down, you can find dry but pregnant cows, and then the next table is cows with calves at foot, all these different categories that will impact on the energy and protein requirements of stock. So it's a really good resource to actually use the drought feeding booklet if you need to look at a couple of different stock categories. The other pathway that you can find the energy requirements for some different classes of stock is to go into the useful tables. Now there's useful tables for either beef or sheep, but we've just clicked on the beef one for the moment. Now you can see there's a list of what those tables are. And when you find the table that's of relevance to you, you just click on it, and then it will actually just scroll down to that table. So you can see we've clicked on the energy and protein requirements of pregnant and dry cows, and it's just scrolled down and taken us to that. So you can see standard table layout, the different live weights down the left-hand side, and then it gives you the energy requirements for those different stock classes or the different weights of that stock class.
Well, I hope that video has helped you out and was worth watching. I think it's really important that you concentrate on that you can have two feedstuffs that look the same. Like you can have two hays and you think, oh yeah, they're pretty similar, but it's not until you feed test them that you can actually work out just how different they are. And then going through the sums like we just have, you say the difference in animal performance is massive. One feed that looks a bit the same, animals will just be maintaining, maybe doing a little bit better than maintenance. And on the other one, we had our 300 kilo steers that were doing over half a kilo per head per day. So it's a massive difference in performance from two different feeds. But unless you're taking a feed test and you actually get it tested so you know the quality of the feed, you're really only guessing. And we can't be guessing when it comes to estimating animal performance, because once we know animal performance, then we know what sort of weights we're going to get to, and we know how long it's going to take us to hit that market specification as well.